Without the Lord in your heart, in our hearts, it doesn't fill that void that we were created.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the only way to have really true happiness and fulfillment.
I think so many times we don't. That's why I use the term take stock, because I think so many times we just are so focused on moving forward. I think we always need to take the time to step back and say, thank you, Lord. I mean, my prayers generally are just being grateful.
Amen.
I mean, they really are. Just being grateful for my good fortune, my life, my health at this point in my life. That's something we all take for granted.
That's right.
And I think, barring some stupid things that we do, that's really God's blessing on us. If we have health, we're blessed with that.
So Devin, did we go down for a second?
We did go down for a second.
Okay.
So, Judge, if you just want to say the verse again real
First
quick.
Chronicles 29:11. And we are discussing that one today. First Ephesians. First Ephesians.
Yeah.
Oh, First Ephesians?
Yeah, it's
Is that a new one? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
First Ephesians. Well, there is the first one. So I always thought about this verse from a financial standpoint. I mean, it's like, to me, it talked about money. And actually, if we go all the way through 12, and I don't know that I have the guts enough to try to recite it, but I remember this being a verse that when I went through, it was Crown Ministries, right? I was a senior in high school, and it was a financial deal that talked about how God views your finances and try to kind of get you on we even learned how to balance a checkbook. It was great. It was a great book. But the verse that I would say it, and I know that I've always said it all out of order, but I tend to get all of the thoughts as I recite it to myself when I'm in a situation like you talked about, and I'll pray. I think the whole verse, if I can add it, it's everything in the heavens and earth is yours, O Lord. And this is your kingdom. We adore you as being in control of everything. Riches and honor are yours alone, and you are the ruler of all mankind. Your hand controls power and might, and it is at your discretion that men are made great and given strength.
pretty much it.
So that second part, I hope I got it. I'm sure it was probably all out of sequence, but that always, it's like God's gonna. It reminds me of when He knows we can handle stuff, He gives you more. And so I always think when I'm stressing on stuff that maybe I'm not taking care of business the right way, and He knows I can't handle it, or He knows who is able to have more, to do the right things with it. And the only interesting part is there's some crazy people that are financially well off, and you kind of think, what was God thinking about them? So then I wonder, so here's the long road to my question. Do you think He's talking about all men or believers? Because there's some guys that, they're not believers.
And
So they're not doing stuff right. They got money.
It's unnerving sometimes when you see somebody lie, cheat, and steal,
Yes.
and do everything opposite of what God desires, and yet they're very successful.
Because it says it is at His discretion that men are made great and given strength in
There's
this
Psalms about that.
in this
By
area.
His discretion.
Yeah,
I think He makes pagans great.
it allows it. Yeah,
I think he makes them great to serve His purpose. I mean, think about somebody who is maybe an atheist or agnostic, and they build a business and become very wealthy building that business. But how many people do they employ who are believers who are reaping the benefit of that person's? So maybe God's using that person's business smarts or ideas or whatever to benefit God's own people.
so that could be used. Now we all know what generic basket to use in every circumstance to just capture all of that. No, you really think that God is like, I need to bless these believers, so I'm going to take the
Sure. I think so.
crooked guy and bless his socks off for a job. I mean,
For a
I
time.
agree it's a real thing, but does he talk about that in the Bible?
Yeah, well, yeah, for sure.
That's
He
what
does.
I guess that's what my question
God
is.
says when in Jeremiah, when the Babylonians are going to come in and destroy Jerusalem, God calls the Babylonian king his servant.
Ooh, okay, now we're getting now.
Hey, you guys on the B side of the table, B team, you guys could interject anytime you want.
Oh,
There reigns on the good and the bad.
Good point.
I like that. No, I'm liking where Scott's really saying, like, God, I mean, it's like God uses everyone. I mean, even the other part where we just,
tapestry of intersections.
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's amazing.
Because your verse says, verse 12, all and everyone.
Yeah,
So there's no exclusions.
okay.
I mean, think about it. God can bless a rebellious, wicked person to benefit his kingdom, and he can bless somebody who is faithful and honoring God.
Right.
The difference is the reward on the other side is different for each of them.
Yeah.
The eternal rewards or whatever are different for each of them. And the Bible says, what does it profit you if you gain the whole world and lose your soul?
Right.
So I'm just looking at the context here. The context of David's prayer is the building of the temple and the gifts that were given for the building of the temple. And that's what he's talking about, is that everybody gave towards the building of the temple. They gave towards the work of the temple of God, 5,000 talents, 10,000 derricks of gold, and 10,000 talents, all this stuff. And and David is praising the Lord for all these gifts because it's God's stuff, and they gave it freely for the building of the temple. You know?
So how would we apply that context to what we're talking about here?
Well, then I'm trying to wrap my mind around a little bit. You know, we just studied like a week ago, and one of the verses was that for what you meant for evil, God
Meant for
used for good. I mean, so it's off of this topic. That's almost, even when stuff does happen, he can use it for his glory. Yeah, we're talking about him proactively deciding, and maybe that's how he deals with presidents, you know. It's not really a rabbit trail. My mind is trying to say, you know, people say, well, you deserve who your leaders are.
Get what you asked for.
And we're told that we need to pray for them and all that. So it really doesn't matter which one he puts in place, because God can use them for his good, and he can also use unbelieving leaders for the benefit of his people. I mean,
Well,
so
it's difficult for us to understand, I think.
Yeah, no, it is. That's why I'm just kind of processing out loud, which is probably not good when
I guess
you're recording something.
I guess I didn't understand this passage to be in that context. He's talking about giving generously. And he even says, but who am I and who are my people that we should be able to give as generously as this? Because everything comes from you, Lord. And we have given only, and we have given you only what comes from your hand. So what he's saying is that it's not like you're giving up anything that was yours.
Right.
You're giving what was given to you.
It's a giant acknowledgement.
It's an
All riches
yes,
and
praise.
honor are yours alone.
Right.
Huh.
So it's not just that the giving towards the temple, he takes it, he goes backwards a little bit, and he says, not just, oh, look how blessed we are because we have all this money for the temple, all this resource now. He's saying, no, let's take a step back. The fact that we even have that resource to give because God blessed us
Right.
a long time ago. That's interesting. I like that.
Wealth and honor come from you. This is his prayer and praise. Wealth and honor come from you. You are the rule of all things. In your hands are strength and power to exalt and give strength to all. So now, our God, we give you thanks and praise for your words. So all that we have comes from you.
So it really gives a responsibility to us. Because down after 14 or 13, oh maybe not 12. I don't see it now, but where he says, "Who are we to have received this? Why do we have this? It all comes from you." I mean, it makes me feel like he's talking about a responsibility. I don't know. Do you feel responsible at all after reading this? Like we're supposed to either think that way, or what do you think's going on there? I mean, I know he's praying, right?
Right.
So it's personal. It's just between David and
But
God.
he announces all this in front. David praised the Lord in the presence of the whole assembly, saying,
Oh, okay.
So he's praising God to the whole assembly. He's speaking to all the people that were assembled there. I'm assuming, I haven't read the previous chapters, but I'm assuming they must have finished the building of the temple. Is that?
Not if
I
it's
don't know.
David praying. That wasn't until Solomon. Unless it's talking about the tabernacle, but I think the tabernacle was already built prior to that too. So it must be looking ahead towards the building of the temple. I'm
Could
assuming.
be.
I do remember because the Sunday school class got all into blood and stuff because we did a little lesson we're talking about first graders here, about building the temple. God wanted them to start with the tabernacle first and then build the temple around it. Of course, we never got to the end of the story because all the kids wanted to know. The tabernacle, and then there was the altar, and they're like, got into blood, and so blood was everywhere. And all these kids were like, and so and how come it was so bloody all the time? I thought Jesus came. And I'm like, well, this is the Old Testament. This is
Before
pre-Jesus.
Jesus.
They were trying to atone for sins through sacrifice. The blood would cover those sins.
I don't think that this is talking about a formula to do this and God blesses. I think it's just a response to the blessing that
Like a
occurred.
thankful heart, like as he's lifting the prayers up, he's overwhelmed with how much they all had corporately, that God gave each of them. And how can it be that we have all this to give? Oh, it's only from you, God. You're the one that decides and gives us.
Well, prior to,
That's kind of,
go ahead.
no,
Prior to
think
the
that's-
judge speaking and sharing his verse, he was sharing about his prayer life too. And when Jesus taught us to pray, and he said, "Hallowed be thy name," we should be praising God in the beginning of our prayers. We should be acknowledging God and his greatness. And I think if we did that, it would put us in the perspective of all the good that we've received came from God.
And he talks about that later on in chapter 17. He says, "I know, my God, that you test the heart and are pleased with integrity. All these things I have given willingly and with honest intent. And now I have seen the joy, how willingly your people who are here have given to you."
Yeah.
So he talks about acknowledging that, but for you, we wouldn't have these things.
Right.
And we joyfully give them because you are the provider.
Yeah, it's interesting that the Bible talks so much about, I guess, this topic. I mean, I never double checked it. I've always heard that money and giving is the number one topic in the Bible. There's more verses by far than
And
anything
about
else.
heaven, for sure.
Huh?
There's more verses about money than there is about heaven.
Well, evidently there's more verses about any topic. Okay? Someone fact check that, but that's my understanding. And I think it's interesting too, because if churches that are, in modern day, You want to see your numbers go down, talk about money all the time. How many people do we know? Well, I used to go to this church, but all they ever did was talk about money, and I left. So I'm just thinking the pastor, if you're learning about the Bible, then you're going to hear about money almost all the time because it's threaded throughout. It's just an interesting thing, you know. And then churches, we've been dealing with something. There's this amazing ministry right now there are churches that are growing. They're not making it financially at all because they're almost like missionaries. They are doing stuff and they're planted in the community. I've had many examples just recently where they're getting it done, lives are being changed, things are happening, but it's all an effort that's a cost that doesn't actually necessarily isn't self-supported. And then there's these other huge organizations like, I don't know, is it CityServe?
CityServe, yeah.
CityServe. Billions, right?
They were
come
almost
alongside
half
churches.
It was $424 million just in 2021 that they distributed
In the U.S.
in the U.S. and they do worldwide.
So
They're one of the biggest supporters right
but
now
they
for humanitarian
recognize-
in Ukraine.
They recognize that churches are doing great work, like a missionary who, you know, the missionary couldn't be there unless he gets somebody else to recognize the work they're doing in the kingdom. And then people will help provide funds to that. Well, churches are becoming that if they're actually in the neighborhoods that can't afford to support their own church. They're doing it right, but the model of the people of the church supporting the church itself doesn't work today.
I've been seeing lately there's churches that are making my dream a reality. When we started our church, I said, you know, I see people, they're griping about some of the attendees. I say, it would be my goal if, you know, a prostitute, for example, straight off the street comes into church. Because, man, if that's not the glory of God in a ministry, or if someone comes in absolutely drunk or on drugs coming to church, what a testimony that would be. Well, when your entire church is so dialed in that your entire congregation, or at least a chunk of them, may be those kind of people, they're not going to give as if you're in one of the crazy Beverly Hills type neighborhoods.
Yeah.
And it blows me away that these mega churches with all the money, well, none of their congregations, I mean, everyone needs it, but they're not the sick. You know,
Everybody needs
you're
it.
a good doctor in a good place, but there's not a lot of sick people around. But if you're a doctor in a sick neighborhood,
Well, let's
no
make
one's
sure we
really-
hashtag prostitute, drunkard, all
Hey,
that stuff.
yeah.
We'll get more views later. So this is great to bring those words
It's
into the
definitely
mix.
it's definitely a crazy thing because we've got now in our community some churches blowing up, and it's really saying, wow, what is it when your congregation is just being fed to such a degree and they're not able to support at the same degree as if you go to some high income neighborhood.
I wasn't trying to make it a rabbit trail. The point of it was that we need to almost, you know, he's like dumbfounded almost, maybe. I could be reading it wrong, but it's kind of like he starts to pray, he's thanking God, then he's like, holy cow, how are we able to give this? And everyone was in community doing their thing and they were blessed by God, and that's what it's doing right now. He's finding ways through these other organizations for people to keep on doing what they've been called to do. And God is making good out of what looks like it could be a bad scenario. And I keep seeing it.
David's also sitting on 100,000 talents of gold while making this prayer.
Oh, really?
The derrick is, sorry, I did the math, $6 million of gold that he talks about in this passage.
Okay.
But also another passage says he had reserved 100,000 talents of gold, which at today's price is $200 billion.
So he's sitting on gold, but he's thanking God for the provision, right?
Imagine that, yeah.
And on top of that, in verse 15, he says, and we are foreigners and strangers in your sight, as were all our ancestors. Our days on earth are like a shadow without hope. I was thinking he was talking about strangers and foreigners in a strange land, but never mind, I take that verse back. But yeah, how did they come up with all that? You know?
Now, what was that song? Was that Kansas?
I don't know what you're talking about.
You want me to sing it?
Yeah,
It's not
yeah.
going to happen. All right, next. Other thoughts?
Well, I did. I mean, I think when you bottom line it, it's just this recognition that all that we have is from the Lord, and we should treat our resources with that kind of understanding. So we hold it loosely rather than, hoarding it.
May I add to that?
Sure.
When we're holding tightly our money, God can't put anything in that fist, in that clenched resource. When we open it up to give, then God can put into our hand as well.
It's a good analogy.
That's good. I like that.
You ever see how they trap raccoons?
Oh, yeah.
You put something in some sort of container or some kind of with little bars on it of sorts. Imagine like a jail cell, something where you can reach in. Raccoons are so stubborn, they will grab something in their wrist now because it's bigger.
Unfist it.
They cannot unfist it, so they will sit there and starve and die. With
Really?
their hands stuck in there. And so if you can't let go, if you're just holding on,
That's
holding
crazy.
on and you're not able to let go, you will sit stuck and die.
I heard that
Wither
about
up.
monkeys. I heard that same thing.
That's
about
how
monkeys.
raccoons. You'll find dead raccoons just in like a.
With their fists
Usually,
still clenched.
it's usually like trash cans. They'll be stuck
Yeah.
there and they'll say, "Where are all these dead raccoons hanging from trash cans?"
That is-
Because they're holding on and they can't.
They can't
They
get
don't
it
want
out.
to drop it to slip their hand out. So it'll just be.
That's interesting. So I want to live more open-handed.
Open-handed, yeah.
And I think that's a.
I like that. There's a guy, he always uses that. I'm just being open-handed with it. It's like, I always took it as like, oh, you trust me. I'm like, why does this guy keep saying I should trust him? So maybe I shouldn't trust him.
Right.
That he would use I'm being open-handed here. So it's almost like I'm, showing you my cards or something?
Right.
So here's the deal. If God's going to bless who he's going to bless, I'm kind of drawing that out of this. If we find ourselves in a spot where we're not sitting on all these golden talents and stuff's not going on, should we be looking at where God is blessing it and go towards that, or stay where we are and pray that he'll turn his blessings towards us?
I'm not sure the question.
If you're starving to death, you should probably move to where the food is.
I see.
Okay, that kind of thing.
That goes back to the old adage that God helps those that help themselves. I think
Is
you
it?
need to. I think you need to recognize that you're going in the wrong direction. If it's not,
What if God's called you into a certain ministry and you feel like it's always struggling and financially, but you feel called into it? Should you try to put yourself in a useful situation in a ministry or helping people where it is having growth and there's not a struggle? You see what I mean? Like
yes.
go where, like if you feel like you want to be used by God, should you just start doing stuff that he's gifted you, or look at where he's doing a work and go be part of it?
Well, okay, so that brings that's the experiencing God thing. Look where God's at work and join him there. I don't know that that's a financial thing, but I think of, I've been in this town for a long time and I know a lot of the pastors. And one guy I know, he's been a mobile church for 20 years or more. Well, ever since I was at Northwest. So
17 or 18.
long time, right? And his church is the same size or smaller than when he started. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I would probably lose my mind if there was no movement forward. But I asked him about it. I said, do you ever feel like, I'm just spinning my wheels? He said, no, I feel like God's called me to this. The results are up to him. I feel called to this. So I take that to mean that there needs to be a strong sense of God's call in what you're doing, right? Another example is I heard this early on in my ministry. I was probably 26, 27 years old. Pastor I worked for, his cousin, or maybe it was his uncle, I think it was his uncle, was a missionary in China. He was there for, I want to say a decade, but it may have been longer, before he saw one single convert.
Oh, wow, that would be just crazy.
I mean, a long time. So I asked, after he shared the story, I asked him, I said, why did he stay? Why did he not just go, apparently God's not calling
God's
me to
not
this.
blessing this
Right.
endeavor.
He said,
Yeah.
because he just had a strong sense that God had called him to this, and so he was going to stay the course. Well, now that particular missions organization is exploding in China. But he had to put in the hard work of breaking the fallow ground for 10 years.
And doesn't it really go back to what you're feeling? I mean, while you look at that and think, my God, 10 years and you had one person come to Christ, but to him, it may be, oh, Lord, thank you. I have this person that came to Christ.
Right.
It could be very, very rewarding to him.
Sure.
And I think that's what you're talking about too, are those ministries that are called to do something and there's just no financial success and they struggle the whole time. But what are they feeling inside?
Right.
Are they feeling very rewarded and are they feeling very grateful?
And that's
so
a different than a financial blessing.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to ask the question, if we're doing what we think we're supposed to do, and God's not blessing us in this context, does he do that? Does he allow us? I mean, should there, I don't think, I'll just answer the question because I'm having a hard time actually forming the question. I don't think that we're only supposed to gauge that we're in God's will and doing our calling by how financially rewarding it has become, because you just said the feeling and the blessings and the friendships. I mean, I suddenly thought of Pastor Joe about all these other things that he had and opportunities to not be in Fresno, and he's like, Fresno is such a blessing to he and his family. They can't imagine. Why would they go do all this other stuff? They're being blessed in a number of ways. Now, that's not a financial thing. That's just this one.
So you also need to look the will of God,
Yeah.
not just what you want it to do to you. Because our verse for this group and associated groups is John 10:10.
Right.
God giving you the abundant life. I was talking with Scott on Monday. We had a deal that we're recording, and I was saying that the abundant life is equally abundant for those that are blessed with amazing riches so that they can minister to people that we never have the chance to ever see, just through the network. It's also an abundant life to those living in absolute mediocrity. They aren't martyrs. They aren't millionaires. They just wake up, have an average house, die at a normal age, and meet the Lord in amazing joy. And it's also the same amount for those that got absolutely butchered for Christ in the Colosseum. You'd say their ministry was probably a failure if they went in their early 20s to go be butchered in the Colosseum. They didn't really have a chance to evangelize. What was that all about? It's all about God's will. And we can't really have some barometer to measure that.
And
So
what is
with our heart to follow the will. And it's not even just about a feeling. Because if that guy in China had no converts and he died with no converts, this was an amazing story that it blew up years later, or even just the one. If he had no converts, he was still following God's will for what he was supposed to do.
That's like, how do you measure success?
Exactly.
How do you measure
Right.
success? What is the abundant life?
The abundant life is what comes next. That's the
Well,
whole.
let me ask you, Bible scholars. There's a few of you that have had significant training. I'm thinking, I want to know if this is from the Bible, where they say you're blessed to be a blessing.
Yeah.
Is that in a verse, or is that just a
That's not. No,
colloquial?
that's a
It's just
paraphrase of
saying.
most of the Bible.
Okay, so what does that mean to you in this scenario here? God blesses people to be a blessing. I
Yes.
don't think that's just
What is
financial.
blessing? Like Judge was saying.
Right.
What is success?
It's a
What is
very
a blessing?
American thing to say blessing equals money.
Right?
And blessing is so much. Blessing is wisdom. Blessing is learning.
Peace.
Blessing.
Blessing's what you have to give.
Not one of the fruits of the Spirit is a cha-ching.
Cha-ching. You know it isn't, is it?
Blessing is whatever you've been given to give. And whatever you've been given, that was what you've been given to give. we look at it, sometimes what we've been given is for me or for my people, right? But no, you've been given so that you can give. We're meant to be conduits. We've heard that 1,000 times, right? We're meant to be conduits of God's blessing. So,
So how
Plus,
are we able to bless then?
my giving is the catalyst for God's blessing in me. 2 Corinthians 9:6. You give sparingly, you reap sparingly, you give abundantly, you reap abundantly. It's a catalyst for God to bless.
And there's different ways to give. One of the things
Exactly
that
right.
Exactly.
I think one of the things that all of us have a tendency to be selfish with is our time.
That's
I mean,
right.
all of us here could be doing something else right now. And when we come to HolySmoke, when we go to our church on Sunday, there's something else we can do.
Right.
When we volunteer to help at our churches or do things,
You're
your
saying
time
we're
is a
selfish?
precious asset.
We're selfish then?
I think sometimes that's one of the things that we
Edit
are
that
selfish with our time.
Edit that. Yeah.
And look at those people. Those people give more of their time and energy than anything else.
So, Judge, I gotta agree that time is a precious asset, and
Oh.
we burned through 30 minutes.
What?
In like 3 minutes.
Yeah, that's how it
I'm
felt.
glad we ate first because I would have been like
And so that's
eating.
HolySmoke puts this on. We're a group of Bible studies nationwide. If you'd like to join, have similar conversations, we'll help you get started. Hit us up. We'd love to show you the way, the truth, and
Typically,
the light.
all around the country, people say, "How long is a HolySmoke?" Because obviously,
Yeah.
you're not getting much
This was
done
only
in
30 minutes.
So HolySmokes are usually about an hour and a half.
Hour and a half.
People say, "Well, how long?" We say the length of a cigar.
The cigar. This one's not done, so we're going to keep talking.
We are, but
And
we're signing off.
Yep.
So join the HolySmoke group. Get the real deal. Tune in every Tuesday. So thanks, guys.
we're still going.
We're still.
multiple candidates.
So everyone, don't move.